While I oppose this amendment at this time, I do wish to thank my colleague from Wisconsin for offering it. In fact, like many on this committee, I share many of his concerns. And I believe deeply, very deeply, in living wages for all working Americans, and often say that consumption is the engine of our economy, and money in people's pockets is its fuel. In fact, the small business that my family and I own already pays a $15 minimum wage, not because the law requires it, rather because it's a principle in which we deeply believe. The fact that a single mother in America can work a 40-hour week at a $7.25 minimum wage and live below the poverty line is as appalling as it is embarrassing to our nation. Congress must address this injustice, just as it must meet the moment during the worst pandemic of our lifetimes and one of the most challenging economic crises of our lifetimes. However, I am troubled that we are adding the minimum wage policy to this COVID relief package through reconciliation. In fact, I was shocked to learn how few small business owners, the very people that this committee is entrusted with representing, how few were consulted as this legislation was being drafted. And I'm willing to wager that there is not a single member of this committee who is not receiving communications from local business owners concerned about the implications of this policy on the very viability of their enterprises. Just days ago, I heard from Ken, the owner of the original Pancake House, one of my favorite restaurants in Plymouth, Minnesota. Like so many businesses which rely on public gathering to succeed, he is barely hanging on. His restaurant, like all restaurants, runs on thin margins even during the best of times, and Ken is deeply concerned that a $15 minimum wage will mean that he will have to cut jobs if he hopes to stay open. Now, I trust that we all agree that representation begins with listening, and we should afford small business owners, just like Ken, the opportunity to be heard before we proceed with the implementation of such a transformative policy. According to the CBO, the policy as written will likely raise wages for 27 million Americans, raise almost 1 million Americans out of poverty, and increase aggregate wages by over $300 billion over 10 years. All of those are outstanding outcomes. But if that is at the expense of 1.4 million lost jobs and the likelihood of many thousands of business closures, as the CBO and economists anticipate, we should investigate, we should deliberate, and we should ultimately implement a mitigating policy that addresses those unacceptable and very preventable consequences. So while we cannot accept this amendment because it doesn't meet the Senate parliamentary requirements relative to reconciliation, I do believe it's an important issue for businesses and employees that warrants a more robust discussion and deliberation in this body. So to that end, as my first order of business as the chair of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, I intend to invite American small businesses to come before our committee to discuss the $15 minimum wage proposal, its impact on their businesses, and how we might accomplish the trifecta of livable wages, more jobs, and thriving small businesses. They are not mutually exclusive objectives in my estimation, and I believe we can accomplish it if we simply commit to working together with intention and bipartisanship. So in closing, I'd like to invite my colleague from Wisconsin to join me at that hearing and to work with me following this markup in sending a letter to the GAO requesting a study on the impact of a $15 federal minimum wage on small businesses throughout our country. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.